What's up, everybody? It's Dan Bear from AdWordsNerds.com here. And in this interview, I'm talking with Chris Heller. Now, if you don't know Chris, if you're like all on the investing side and that's not a household name for you, you are going to want to check out this interview. I have talked to very few people who are more experienced and more deeply thoughtful about the real estate industry than Chris. Just a couple of Chris's bona fides. He was the rookie of the year in 1989 when he got into real estate as an agent. He was the top producing agent in San Diego. He was the top Keller Williams associate across the entire country. Not only that, he was named to be president of Keller Williams Worldwide in 2010, launching the company's first regions outside of North America. He became CEO of Keller Williams in 2015, helping to lead Keller Williams to become the tech company it is today. He then moved on to become CEO of Mellow Home, helped them double their growth over the course of his tenure there. And then he became a chief real estate officer at Ojo Labs. They recently purchased Movoto, which is the fifth largest real estate website in the world. Look, this is someone with an incredibly thoughtful philosophy about how he moves through life, makes decisions, looks at opportunities, thinks about risk, and as someone who's been building powerful and successful real estate teams at every single possible level. This is going to be an interview you're going to want to listen to closely and take notes on. So without any further ado, let's jump to my interview with Chris Heller. All right, what's up? This is Daniel Barrett. I'm here with Chris Heller. Chris, how are you, my friend? Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, Dan, I'm great, and thanks for having me on. Excited to talk to you.
Yes, I am super excited to talk to you. We talked a little bit before this call, and I'd have so many things I want to talk about. However, I want to start maybe in a slightly weird place, which is I want to start with your book. So you have a book out. It's called Dominant Thoughts. And anybody who's listening to this, you can go check it out at dominantthoughts.com. But I am fascinated by people who choose to go the route of writing books. And you have had this incredible career. We're going to go back over it in a little bit, but I am curious, why a book? Like, why decide to go into this whole process, which is a very difficult one, right? Writing a book is hard. So what made you want to pursue that?
Maybe a better question is, why am I working on the second one, which I'm starting right now? So there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I thought about it for a long time and thought it would be cool someday. About a little over a year ago, I was on a podcast with a couple other guests. And one of the other guests had written several books. And near the end of the podcast, the host said, "Hey, Chris, when are you going to write a book?" And I said, "I don't know, I've thought about it, but I really have to have Greg here show me how to do it because he's the pro." Just jokingly. 2 days later, he called me and said, "Okay, I've had this idea. I already have the title and the URL. If you have the content, I'll show you how to do it and we'll be co-authors, but you do all the work. I have all the contacts and I have all the knowledge." And I said, "Deal." That's how it came about.
Yeah.
Probably the real reason why I did it is I have 4 kids between the ages of 22 and 30, and I wanted to have an effective way to transfer some of the things I've learned to them. Because dad telling them things isn't an effective way. They don't want to hear that. In a book, maybe one of their friends will read it and say, "Wow, this was really good," and they'll cause them to read it, or they'll just get around to reading it someday. So that was the other motivation.
Yeah, it does strike me that I have this fantasy, right? This may be a weird fantasy to have, but in the fantasy, like I'm long dead essentially. And the kids like open up like a giant treasure chest in the attic, they dust it off and they're like, "Wow, there's all these cool things that I wrote in there." This idea of passing things on is so powerful. So I love that that's like your motivation. Give people the kind of elevator pitch for Dominant Thoughts, right? What's it about and why should they check it out?
It's a book on mindset and leadership. I wrote it in the form of a parable. It's a short read. It's 118 pages. It's about a mentor and a mentee that meet. And then each chapter, as the story progresses, highlights another lesson that I've learned. And my lessons have just come from, like you said, a long career, getting to work and have opportunities, have mentors a lot of people haven't had. I've worked directly for running the companies of 2 self-made billionaires and had other great mentors in my life. And so it's just taking a lot of those lessons that have helped me be successful and achieve things that are maybe out of the ordinary for someone that had the background I've had. And those are the things that I think people will like about and get out of the book.
Let's dive into that, because I think part of what's going to make people want to check out this book, and again, if you're listening to this, you absolutely should check it out. It's at dominantthoughts.com. Go check it out. But it's like, for people who don't know you, or maybe don't know your background, what was your trajectory into real estate? Which is a lot of stuff. So we could cover it at a high level, but tell people a little bit about what got you into real estate, what your journey has been, because it's been very impressive and touching a lot of different parts of the industry that I think people will think is really interesting.
Yeah, so I'll give the sort of the Reader's Digest.
Yeah, give the quick one, and then because I'm going to keep making you go back and dive in, so we'll get there. Yeah.
I'm happy to do that. So I was a sophomore in college, and I got my real estate license for a summer job of selling timeshares. You had to have a license in California.
Wow, real and classic timeshare. Sorry, I'm already interrupting. Are we
Classic
talking like classic, like closed room, sit down, do the seminar, timeshare sales like that?
Yeah, hardcore 90-minute presentations. And that summer job turned into 3 years of doing that. And I was making really good money. I actually bought my first townhome when I was 20 years old. And during that time, I met a real estate broker. And for 3 years from the time I met him, he kept recruiting me, saying, hey, you should get into residential real estate. You'll be great. Come work for me. You'll love it. Yeah. And for 3 years, he'd write me notes. He'd call me every time I saw him. He'd bring it up. And the reality is, one day he caught me at a weak moment. I was in between ventures, and I was seeing him about something else. And during that meeting, he was successful in getting me to say, okay, I'll give it a try. And so that's how I got into real estate. That first year, I was Rookie of the Year in San Diego. Every year, my business went up, even at that time, as we were heading into a down market. Within several years, I was one of the top 10 agents in the country for the national company that I was with. In 2004, I switched companies. So after 16 years with that same company and being one of the top 10 agents in the country, I switched to another company, which was Keller Williams. And within a few years, opened up some franchises. A few more years, became the #1 Keller Williams agent in the world. And then in 2010, they asked me if I'd be interested in taking an executive role with them and helping them expand Keller Williams globally around the world. And I did. I knew nothing about it. I didn't know how to, it was completely new, completely uncharted waters for me and them. But the good news is I figured it out, became very successful. Within 5 years, they then asked me to become the CEO of the company, which I did. And I finally left Keller Williams about 5 years ago in 2017. And then I've had a real estate team all along and still have a real estate team in San Diego. And after I left Keller Williams, I got introduced to the founder of Loan Depot, which is the second largest non-bank lender in the world. And after meeting with him 10 different times, I joined him and became the CEO of his sister company called Mellow Home, and did that. During that time, I was advising several startup companies and invested in several startup companies. And one of them, this one, Ojo Labs, I became a board member. And then in 2019, they asked me to join them full time. The company was really growing. They could really use me, and I thought it'd be a fun adventure. And so that's still where I'm at, and what we're doing is building an exciting company.
Yeah, that whole journey is so amazing. And there's so many different pieces I want to dive into. I actually want to start all the way back at the beginning, because like one of the things I love about this story is the broker who spends 3 years following up with you being like, hey, you should come and work with me. Like, I love the dedication, and like clearly they saw something in you. So I'm curious, what do you think they saw in you that made them want to put in that amount of effort and time to get you over to their team? What was it that sort of drove them? Because obviously it's like the timeshare thing. It's such a particular thing, right? It's so unique in a lot of ways. What made them go after you think?
Yeah, Dan, that's a great question. And back then, I would say there probably wasn't much. I was so young and raw and new. I think if anything, he probably saw that I was very quiet, very introverted, but I was very driven. And he probably got a sense of that I had this drive, this desire to achieve. And during that process of those 3 years, I saw a lot and learned a lot. Like, I really got the meaning of someone being persistent, of someone being consistent in their efforts, and what it really meant to do that at a high level. And so that is, I think, but back to your question, I think he just saw that I had this sort of this quiet, pretty high drive to achieve.
I'm curious, and I promise I will move on from timeshare soon, but I'm like fascinated by timeshare sales. And actually, I was on the podcast of a very good friend of mine, Matt Kimberly, who also came up through timeshare sales. So it was like his first introduction to sales. He ended up going into sales coaching and consulting, was very successful. So I'm curious, you mentioned persistence, but what were the lessons that you feel like you took away from that? Because I think a lot of people look at timeshare sales and say, oh, it's over the top, super hard sale, trap them in the room or whatever. Is there anything from that time period you feel like you still apply today?
Absolutely. If I had any fear of rejection, it completely obliterated that. So I had no fears of rejection after doing that for several years. Also, the other thing I took away that really helped me when I got into residential real estate was being able to make a concise and effective presentation. As I got into residential real estate, if you were thinking about selling your home, you'd probably interview several agents. If I was one of those agents, I had a presentation that wasn't special, but it was effective and it followed a pattern. And it's the same type of thing when I did as I was selling timeshares. So it was a combination of questions that would lead us down a path to where we wanted to get to. So being able to really learn how to present, because I was presenting 3 or 4 times a day, 90-minute presentations, and I was pretty much doing it 7 days a week because they would let me, and going to school at night. And so I got pretty proficient at doing that.
It strikes me, you just getting reps in, which is so valuable, especially in a young age. So let's fast forward. Let's talk a little bit about Keller Williams. Obviously, it's a giant in the industry. It's a company that everybody knows, and you were at the top of that company. But I am very curious about this period where you got into, you come up to the executive level for the first time, and you're not, just like you said, it was a new thing for you. You weren't really sure what it was going to be like, but you ended up figuring it out. So you've been in a bunch of situations, I think, in your career where you go into new territory. It's obviously related to what you do, but it's some kind of new application. So thinking back to that time, how did you deal with being in a new part of the business, new responsibilities that you didn't have experience with? Was that nerve-wracking? Was it exciting? And how do you navigate that? Because I think a lot of people would hold themselves back from making that jump because they feel like, I don't have the experience, I wouldn't know what to do.
I certainly didn't have the experience. I certainly didn't know what to do. It was probably nerve-wracking, but it occurred to me as a big opportunity and a super big challenge. And I like those two things. I like big opportunities. I like big challenges. In fact, in my mind, it teetered on the edge of being impossible. Like, how am I going to do this? No one at the company knows anything about it. They're saying, Chris, we believe you can do this, and we're hiring you to do this, and you need to go figure it out. And so that seemed like the biggest mountain to climb at the time. I liked that challenge. So I went at it very aggressively and jumped into it. Now, all of it was new. Having spent 26 years running my own real estate team as the boss, and now being in a company where you're an executive and you have all these different people in different organizations, I had to learn a whole new set of skills. And the good news is I learned pretty quickly, and I learned by observing a lot. So when I'm in a situation, I can quickly assess what I need to do and who I need to work with to help accomplish the things I want to accomplish. But it was a new process, a new set of skills for sure.
When you're making that assessment, so you say you were learning a lot by observation, you're modeling people, right? How do you assess who to look at and who to learn from, right? Because in any situation, you have people that are successful essentially by accident, right? Just statistically, that's going to be the case. Maybe not by accident, but it's not necessarily what they did that got them to where they are. And then you also have people who are very much there as purely a product of stuff that they did. You could talk about Keller Williams, or you could bring it to the future and say, hey, if I'm in a new situation, here's how I do that. Generically, if you don't want to talk about specifics there.
Yeah.
How do you decide who to model or who to look at?
I'm always looking for people who are doing more than me or better at things than I am, but to see what I can learn from them. And then I've also always operated on this sort of this guise or philosophy of failing fast. I know I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not afraid to make mistakes. I don't like it, and it's not my goal. But I also know if I'm making mistakes, that I'm trying hard and going fast. As long as I'm failing forward in my mistakes and learning from them, then I know I'm going to grow and learn very fast. And so the CEO of the company at the time was a great leader and has since become a great friend. And so he was a great role model for me, and in a way, a great mentor for me to be able to see what he's done and how he's done it, and to be able to model some of the things after that. As I mentioned earlier, I've had a lot of great mentors in my life. So with all of them, there's been takeaways, things that you learn that you take on and you do, and then things you learn from them that you don't want to do or that aren't good things to do. That those are, when you jump into a new situation like that, I think this intuitively new, don't act like I know what I don't know, and don't be afraid to ask questions. and watch, listen, and learn, and then start to move forward and then move faster and faster.
So I'm curious, like you mentioned, you're a CEO of Keller Williams, you're at the very top of such a large organization. I am curious what you think that they do particularly well, or if you wanted to take that question somewhere else, when you are looking at other companies, what do you look for in order to say this is a company that's going to be successful, that's going to be able to achieve their goals? What do you think is either the sort of, not quite the secret sauce, but something that Keller Williams either does really well or something that you look for in a similar company?
At the time, and I've been gone 5 years, so I can't really speak to, there's what I observed from an outsider now, but at the time, they did some things that they did better than anyone else in the industry. So at the time, training and education, they were hands down the best training and education company in the industry. And so they had a unique value proposition that we could build off of. When I look at other companies, those are some of the things I look for. Now, when I look at companies, the first thing I look at is the people, the leadership. Are they good people? Are they great leaders? Are they aligned? Is it a company full of political maneuvers, or is it a company that's really a tight team that's on a mission to achieve something? Because I think people are the most important thing. What the company has, its assets, it's where it's going, what it's doing is secondary to the team that ultimately has to make it all happen.
I love that. It makes the follow-up question that I would have then, I guess, is how do you spot a good leader? Because if you're essentially saying, okay, you invest in the company, but you really are investing in people because the company is just people, right? And
Yep.
you're really looking for someone who's a good leader. You could have a leader that's charismatic per se, but maybe isn't the best decision maker, or maybe is a great decision maker, but doesn't have that sort of natural charisma that kind of flows across the conference table or whatever. So if you're looking at, for example, some of the startups that you've invested in, how have you trained yourself to spot people that are great leaders or great at putting together teams that work together well?
Yeah, so I think part of it is they got to be great human beings. The best leaders that I've seen and met are the ones that people follow them because of who they are, not because of their position or their title or that they want to get somewhere. They follow them because they're great people and great humans. Another way to judge how effective someone is as a leader is to look at how effective the people are that they're leading. Are they building leaders? Are they leading leaders? Are the people below them thriving and growing and progressing? Or are they keeping them down? Or are people leaving them? So those are the things that you look at that give you signs of whether someone's a great leader or not. I think another thing is, are they someone that you are ready and willing to go to battle with every day? Do you like them? Do you respect them? Do you trust them? Those things have to be present. And if they're not, then it's probably going to be a temporary situation.
Yeah, just because you won't last, essentially.
You won't last, and it won't ultimately be fulfilling, or you'll find out that things were a lot shinier on the outside than they were on the inside once you get on the inside.
I want to get to Ojo Labs in a moment, but I do want to ask about building and running a team. Because you have built and run teams at basically every different possible level of size of business, right down from your real estate team all the way up to being CEO of a gigantic real estate company. Now you're coming in as an investor and a mentor and a board member, working with teams of various sizes. How do you think through the process of building a team? Because this is something I always say, like, the podcast is just a secret way for me to ask questions to people who are smarter than me. Like, one of my big challenges has been putting together a team that gels both in terms of just personality, everybody gets along, and has a really high standard of performance. And I've built both of those, but not at the same time. And so I'm getting better, but I'm always curious how people who have done that consistently think through that problem.
There's a couple things that I always look at. One is to hire talented people, and the most talented I can find. People that are better than me at the things that I need them to do. And I'm not afraid to have super talented people and people smarter than me and better than me and that. In fact, I know that I need that to be able to get to where I want to go or to help the company get where we want it to go. I also look for specific types of people that can speak. No, but people that like to be on a team, people that thrive in a team environment. There's some people that are better on their own and they're a solo superstar and great and good for them. I'm looking for people that are great teammates, are great humans, that have high integrity, that are trustworthy, that are loyal, right? All the pieces that you'd want when you put a team together. And when you have a team of people like that, then you can really accomplish things. Then you got everyone rowing in the same direction and marching to the same beat and whatever other cliche we want to use to achieve things that are going to be extraordinary.
Are there like markers for that? Do you look for like they played varsity sports or something? Like, how do you figure that out?
That's one that I used to always ask people, did you play sports growing up? And it wasn't a bias towards someone if they did or didn't. I just wanted to understand, have they experienced being on a team before? Have they experienced winning as a team and losing as a team? Or did they play individual sports? And not that would be a deciding factor, but it would help me understand who I was sitting in front of. I would also want to know about their past. We talked a little bit about, my trajectory, but I want to see what their trajectory was. And I want to understand more about it and what were the challenges they faced and how did they respond to those challenges? Were they a victim about it? Did they blame the situation or the person or the situation? Or were they self-aware enough to say, hey, here's what I didn't know at the time, or what I wasn't very good at, or what I had to get better at. And here's what I did to do that. Did they, every time they fell down, did they look at someone else to play the blame, or look at themselves and say, okay, here's what I did, and here's how I got better, and here's how that helped me moving forward. So there's all those signs that people will share with you if you ask the right questions.
Yeah, it strikes me that balance of team spirit or like team commitment, and also the willingness to take personal responsibility. If you can put those things together in a talented person, that's a really powerful package. I really like that way of thinking about it. So let's transition a little bit. There's so much I want to go. I'm like rushing. I'm like, I got into everything. We've got to talk about Ojo Labs. So for people who are not familiar, this OJO, I think it's just ojo.com. Is that the website?
Yeah, ojo.com.
So walk people through Ojo Labs and what you guys do, because it is a varied offering. You're touching multiple pieces of the real estate market. So talk people through what Ojo.
I could describe it in a number of ways, but I think of it as a marketplace. We're a technology company in the real estate space. On one side, we have consumers. On the other side, we have service professionals, real estate agents, mortgage professionals, and eventually other types, insurance, home improvement, all those type of things. And we're able to help consumers no matter where they're at in the process. If they're just starting out, they may spend time on our primary site, which is movoto.com, eventually be rebranded to ojo.com. But movoto.com is the 5th largest real estate site in the country. And a consumer will start there. They'll whatever they need. We hope they can find it there. When they have specific questions or needs and they raise their hand or fill out a form or ask a question or call us, we talk to every one of them. We find out how we can best help them. If what they need is to see a specific property or to be connected to a great agent, we have a network of 32,000 top agents across the country where we can make those introductions, whatever market they're in, to help them achieve their goals. It's helping people buying and selling, investing in real estate that don't have a strong connection to a great agent already.
This is going to be the connection to what I do, because Movoto specifically, which is Movoto, if anyone wants to go check that out, is one of the search terms in Google Ads that really seems to be on the rise. It's something that we really started to see cropping up in pretty much every market a couple of years ago, and it's just been like steadily increasing in traction. So it's like one of the things that, just crosses over into what I do. I am curious, like, you really could have gone anywhere after your sort of career trajectory. I'm curious what drew you to Ojo specifically. What was it about them that really made you want to not just be on the board, but take a leadership position and really get involved in the company?
What got me on the board and what had me want to be part of them were the founders, the co-founders, one of which is the CEO of the company, John Berkowitz. And he's a great leader. He has all the attributes that we've talked about. And that was someone that I felt very comfortable with. As I mentioned, for me to go do anything, I have to have that trust, that respect, and feel like, okay, here's someone who understands me at a deep enough level that can help me achieve my goals or put me in a situation where I can help the team win. And he had all those attributes. What they were doing was, at the time when the company was younger, was again this big mission we were on. We didn't acquire Movoto till June of 2020, and that was one of several companies that we've acquired. And so the first and foremost thing, Dan, was it was the team of people. And there had been people with him that had been with him through multiple companies. These are people that I had spent and got to spend a lot of time with as an advisor and then a board member. I got to see inside. So taking that leap wasn't that big of a leap because it was a known entity for me, the company and the team. At the time, I was, as I mentioned, I was at Loan Depot and the CEO of their sister company. And at the time, the mortgage industry was similar to what's going on right now. It had gone into a really tough place. And so a lot of the things that I went to that company to do, we just couldn't do. We had to focus on survival and keeping the doors open and narrowing our focus to what the company did best versus all the things we aspired to do. And so I felt, although I was well compensated and in a great position, and like the people I was with, I wasn't able to do the stuff I wanted to do. And at Ojo, they were growing big enough where they said, hey, we could really use you. It's super important to me to feel like I'm contributing at a high level every day. If I don't feel like I'm doing that, then I don't feel productive. It doesn't feel good. And so those were the reasons that had me make that move and join the company that I'm with.
I love that. And I love that such a big part of your decision was your pursuit of this sense of sort of productive fulfillment, right? Which to me, I think comes across in a lot of the stuff that you do. So that ties into one of the questions that I had for you, which was, how do you make decisions? Because you are clearly highly analytical, right? You have the sort of that mindset. You've got this sort of investment math piece, right? Where you are clearly weighing that, but you are also clearly weighing these sort of more ambiguous things like your sense of fulfillment and your enjoyment and leadership and teamwork and things like that. So how would you describe how you make decisions?
At different stages of my career, I probably used different skill set and different experiences, so I probably made them differently. I'll talk about how I do it today. It's got to feel right. There's a feeling, I think of the real estate investments I've made over the years, and I've made quite a few of them being in the business. And you have those ones where every cell in your body knows like this is a great opportunity. And you take that opportunity and you benefit from it. And the ones that you don't, even if it was 20 years ago, you remember like that felt right and I didn't act on it and I should have. So that's part of it, the decision-making process. But to your point also, I am very analytical by nature. So I think one of the things that I do fairly well is the bigger the decision, the quicker I can analyze it. I get stuck sometimes on little decisions. What am I going to wear today? Those types of things. But on big decisions, whether it's investments or companies or acquisitions or mergers or strategies, I don't know where this came from, but I tend to be able to see things in a 360-degree view. And see what's around the corners and what the consequences are, intended and unintended consequences of some of the decisions that are made. And so then I do a risk analysis. I was sharing with a friend this weekend. I think from the outside, a lot of the things I do and decisions I make look like I have high risk tolerance and are risky and big moves, but they don't feel that way to me because I've already weighed the downside and I don't do anything that I'm not prepared to deal with if it doesn't work out. Quickly assessing the upside and the downside. Does it feel right? Is there a big opportunity? Is there a high likelihood that if we do the things we know we can do, and I have things I know I can do, that we can succeed? Because I like to succeed and I like to win. So those are all part of the criteria that goes into the decision-making process.
So let me ask the inverse of that question, which is, where do you think most people mess up their decision-making process? What do people overlook or miss or maybe don't even think about that sort of leads them down the pathway to suboptimal decision-making?
I think a lot of people either make assumptions or think they know things and don't really explore whether they do know or not. So they aren't asking enough questions. They aren't talking to enough people. That's part of my decision-making process too, is I have some very trusted advisors and mentors and coaches that I can talk to and bounce things off and make sure I'm not missing something, or am I looking at something through a biased filter, or am I looking at it in a realistic way? I think a lot of people don't do that. They either don't have access to that, or they haven't developed that network of people that they can talk to about those decisions, because it's very easy to miss things or to see things that you think you're seeing it clearly, and you're not. You're missing the obvious signs of something. So I think that's a mistake people often make, is they just don't take the time to seek the advice of others that have already done it or have achieved it at a really high level. I think another common mistake is making fear-based decisions. People make decisions out of fear, right? They don't do something because of fear, or they do something because of fear. And it's very rare that we ever see a good outcome out of a fear-based decision. It usually doesn't go well. We all have fear. I have it, but I think I tend to move through it very quickly and deal with it and get through it, because I know it's always better on the other side than being on this side of it. And so if I find myself making a decision or having a thought out of fear, I quickly catch that and then change that course.
So that brings me to risk. Now, one of the things that we talked about, we had an earlier conversation, we were getting to know each other, and we talked a little bit about decision making. And one of the things that you mentioned was de-risking your decisions, right? Sort of doing what you can upfront before you commit to either alleviate risk or make it less likely. I'm curious, how do you do that? Like, how do you think through that process? If you are, for example, making a move that to an outsider seems quite risky, how do you make it less so for you so that you can experience that big upside without taking on the risk of the downside that other people at least might perceive as there?
Yeah, I think it's healthy to always look at worst case scenario. Okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? And oftentimes it's not as bad as we think it would be, or that we had built it up to be in our minds. So that's one thing to look at when you're assessing risk. The other is, I think my dad told me this a long time ago, and it was in relationship to gambling. Right? Don't ever gamble anything that you can't afford to lose. And so I take that same philosophy when I'm assessing risk and decisions that are being made. I think another thing is I've really developed the ability to focus on the opportunities. So even when it doesn't pan out or play out the way that we wanted to, or thought it was going to, or had hoped for, there's opportunities everywhere, and looking for the opportunities so that what might look like a defeat turns into an opportunity. What might look like a loss becomes an opportunity. What might look like a setback is just another step towards another opportunity. So those are the things that they look at. Worst case scenario, am I going to lose anything I can't afford to lose? Or I'm not going to bet the farm on something that's a coin toss. And then looking at always for the opportunities, which is another way to mitigate the risk, because if things don't go as planned, instead of just accepting that, saying, all right, back to the drawing board, or I'm going to do something new, you're looking for and finding the opportunities to turn that lemon into lemonade.
Man, I definitely am going to go back and transcribe this and put it in a little template that I can just paste into everything and journal about every time I want to make a decision, because I love the idea of just thinking up front, like, what's the worst that can happen, and making sure that you can handle it. Something we talk about with our clients all the time, right? When we're talking about ad budgets or marketing budgets, where I always say, budget what you can afford to lose for 6 months. Because it's not that I think that's going to happen, but I want to know that you're not going to go out of business if everything doesn't go your way, because that's not usually the case. I want to shift focus a little bit. We're coming up on time. I want to start wrapping things up, but I am so curious, for someone who has such an insider's view of real estate, and particularly prop tech and real estate tech and the internet and how all those things are interacting. And that you could take this question wherever you want to go, but what do you think the future of real estate looks like?
So I'll try to answer that from a couple different perspectives. From a consumer perspective, I think we're going to have more options than we've ever had before. The optionality will continue to increase and multiply. And options for how we buy properties, options for how we sell properties, options for how we own properties, options for how we finance properties. There's so much money and focus being spent on creating new options and products and platforms for consumers. So from a consumer standpoint, they'll have more options. Now, generally, that's a good thing, but not always. The more options you have, the more difficult the decisions are sometimes, and trying to choose the right path, the best path for you. When we talk about the real estate industry from an agent or a broker's perspective, that's one of the opportunities. I believe that with big decisions and big purchases, and real estate certainly is at the top of that list, people always will want and need consulting, advising. And the more options people have, the more the need for someone to help them really assess those options and analyze those options and come up with the best one for them. So that's at a real high level, what things look like going forward. There will continue to be technological advances, right? Technology is growing and advancing at a faster pace than we can even really imagine. And that will create new products and new platforms. And if you're in the industry as an agent or broker, new ways for you to do things and things that you had to do before that you no longer had to do, which is now automated or has a more efficient or effective way of doing it has been created using the use of technology. But also being able to do your job at a higher level because you're now being enabled by the technology and technological advances. I think another thing that'll change going forward is it will continue to change our expectations in consumer behavior. As consumers, we get spoiled really fast. The Amazon effect changed how we shopped online forever, and it set a bar and set an expectation. And that happens with every new technology and every new adoption of technology. So that will continue on at a very fast pace. And then one of their challenges will be to stay at or ahead of that, to be able to offer experiences that come to demand and expect. I could go so deep into different areas, but Dan, that's a quick overview of the future.
We have time. Just keep going. I'm going to take notes. Where do I put my money? No, I think your take on it is so insightful, right? Because there obviously are multiple stakeholders in any real estate transaction, and every single one of them is being affected. Your remark about the Amazon effect is so funny because we were literally just having the conversation with my wife the other day where she ordered some pottery, sort of ceramics equipment, and from a independent seller because she wants to support a small business, but she's complaining that they charge for shipping. And I'm like, everybody used to charge for shipping and it still costs money to ship stuff. We've just forgotten that. It's like it never happened, which is fascinating to me. All right, last question, because I want to let you go. You're a busy man, but there's just so much I want to ask you. One thing that you have mentioned a couple different times that's really obvious to me is that you work very hard to put yourself in the room with people that you perceive as smarter than you, better than you, great leaders, like you said, right? You want to put yourself in that room with people that really push you to be your best. That's such a core part of your kind of personal development philosophy that I really appreciate. I am curious today. So Chris Heller today, who do you look up to? Who do you look at as someone who is really killing it? It could be business, your personal life or whatever, but who do you look up to today?
I've said this before, but you just made me think of it. There's leadership lessons all around us and all the time. And it's really whether we're paying attention to them or catching them. But to answer your question, look at some of the leaders that I work with. When we focus on people's strengths and we focus on their superpowers, there's a lot of people that you can look up to because of those. And we get into trouble when we try to make them everything for us. We'll use someone famous, for example, Elon Musk. There's certain things about Elon Musk that I admire at the highest level. And there's other things that I don't care for or aren't congruent with my beliefs or standards or likes. And so I take pieces from different people and the people that I admire them for certain things, but I don't put them on a pedestal and say, okay, this is a great person, because none of us are great at everything. We all have things that we could be better at or that we aren't as good as we should be at. So I just look for the gold in whoever I'm dealing with or whatever situation I'm in, or whoever I'm looking at. In business, there's so many great leaders. One person I spent a lot of time thinking about and reading about and following is Adam Grant. He is the Wharton professor and author. And I really like how he thinks. And I really like how he assesses things. But there's many like that.
Cool. Is there somewhere I should, like a particular book or piece of writing that I should check out Grant at?
Any of his books. The first one that I read that I fell in love with was, I think it was called Givers and Takers or Give and Take. His last two books, and I'm drawing a blank on the most recent one. I can picture the cover, but I can't picture the name. But anything that Adam Grant writes is worth reading.
All right, cool. I will look up some of those books. I'll put them in the show notes, which you can get at AdWordsNerds.com. Chris, this has been amazing for me. I really enjoyed nothing more than deep diving on people's decision-making process, and you are one of the best people to ever be on this show and do that with me, so I really appreciate it. So if you are listening to this, you want to follow up more with Chris, obviously the book Dominant Thoughts, which you can find at dominantthoughts.com. You also have a website, Chris chrisheller.co. Heller is spelled Heller, so chrisheller.co. Is there anywhere else that you want people to find you online? Do you use social media much or anything?
I do. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. People reach out to me all the time on those platforms, and I do my best to always respond. So yeah, reach out however works for you.
That is an incredibly gracious offer that I hope people will not abuse. But Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. This was a real treat for me. I really appreciate it. You delivered a ton of value to our audience. So thank you so much.